Here's a question. Is President Trump a socialist? So far in his second term, he has approved a U.S. chip sale to China in exchange for 15% of profits, signed off on the sale of U.S. steel in return for a government golden share, strong-armed law firms into providing free services to his administration, told companies like Walmart to eat the costs of tariffs, secured a 10% government stake in Intel just the other day. And now today, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said the Pentagon is weighing equity stakes in defense contractors. As my guest writes, this is the nightmare right-wing politicians have been warning about for a century. The era of small government is over. Joining us now, former Republican governor of Ohio and MSNBC political analyst John Kasich, Christine Romans, and David Graham are still with us. This is David's piece. He is the author behind it. David, it would not have been predictable in years past to say that the era of expanded big government, getting involved in private business, getting involved in every aspect financially of daily life would have come from somebody with an R in front of their name.
That's right. I'm not sure it even would have been predictable last year. You know, we've spent the last 15 to 20 years with prominent Republicans and conservatives warning that Barack Obama was a socialist. Donald Trump said that Kamala Harris was a communist. They've argued against state intrusion into things. And what we see now is the most intrusive federal government since Franklin Roosevelt, probably, really entering into all areas of American life. They're, aggressively trampling on states' rights. They're getting into business with private companies. They're telling private institutions how to conduct their business. It's really a remarkably sprawling state.
But this isn't a left-wing version of socialism. This is a right-wing version of socialism. What's the difference, David?
Well, I think what we see in common is state control. It's like a directed economy. What we see in different are the kinds of proposals that they're following. We don't see a Trump administration that wants to build social services, for example, or expand the social safety net. It's the opposite. And in fact, the payroll of the government is dropping. But we do see them wanting to assert control over private business, assert control over private institutions. And that's to achieve the policy ends of the Trump administration. It's to combat wokeness. It's to go after civil rights regulations. It's to go after putative crime in Democratic-run cities and states, for example.
There's also this, and I don't think, Governor Kasich, you would have predicted this, although, there was some overlap in 2016, certainly. But Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump see eye to eye. This is from Punchbowl. I'm glad the Trump administration is in agreement with the amendment I offered 3 years ago to the CHIPS Act. No, taxpayers should be.
In today's fast-evolving electric vehicle, EV market, the spotlight has shifted from flashy innovations and futuristic design to something far more technical: the global supply of permanent magnets. These components are hidden inside the motors of almost every high-efficiency EV on the road today. Though they weigh just a few grams, their importance is massive. Without them, modern EV motors lose power, become less efficient, generate more heat, and take up more space, all critical concerns for automakers aiming to deliver performance, range, and compactness. And now, these magnets are at the center of a major policy and trade debate, sparked by the United States, considering a steep 200% tariff on imported rare earth elements, the primary material in permanent magnets. This decision has not only intensified industry discussions, but has begun to directly affect how automakers plan production, manage costs, and communicate with consumers. At the heart of the issue lies the fact that nearly all major EV manufacturers, including Tesla, GM, and Ford, have adopted permanent magnet synchronous motors, PMSMs, as their go-to technology. These motors offer unmatched energy efficiency, lower heat generation, and better acceleration advantages that directly improve vehicle range and performance. Tesla, known for optimizing every watt of battery energy, has engineered its motor architecture around PMS. GM has built its entire Ultium platform on this configuration. Ford, following a similar path, has based models like the Mustang Mach-E and F-150 Lightning on the same principles. But this collective commitment to one technology creates a critical point of vulnerability, a global supply chain that hinges on a very limited number of suppliers and production regions, especially in Asia. The sudden threat of heavy tariffs disrupts more than just prices. It upends entire manufacturing schedules, introduces planning uncertainty, and puts the U.S. auto industry at risk of falling behind. While political leaders may view the tariff announcement as a strategic negotiating tool in trade talks, the reality on the ground for automakers is far more complex. A 200% import tariff sounds bold and strong, but it creates massive uncertainty for manufacturers. Even with potential exemptions or phased introductions, the market reacts to instability, not intentions. Insurance premiums go up, logistics planning becomes harder, financing for inventory grows more expensive, credit availability tightens, and perhaps most damagingly, suppliers, ports, and transporters begin to hedge their bets, raising rates and reducing risk exposure, all of which drives costs higher long before any new domestic capacity is ready to replace what was once a reliable, affordable supply of critical components. It's important to understand that the cost of the part itself, the magnet, is not the true problem. These are relatively inexpensive components when measured per vehicle. What escalates the cost dramatically is the chain reaction caused by delays, planning disruptions, and uncertainty. For example, when a single shipment of magnets is delayed or held at port due to regulatory ambiguity, the entire production schedule of a vehicle model may be disrupted. Missed manufacturing slots, idle factory hours, rescheduled launches, and lost marketing campaigns all contribute to rising costs. And these costs are not theoretical, they're real, measurable, and they impact the final price tag a consumer sees. A $10 part delay could eventually add hundreds or even thousands of dollars in financing, labor, and rescheduling losses. This is what makes the conversation around tariffs and rare earth imports far more complex than it appears at the surface. Some argue that alternatives like induction motors or switch reluctance motors could be adopted to replace permanent magnet technology. And while that's theoretically true, transitioning an entire fleet of vehicles or even a few key models to a different motor architecture is a multi-year, capital-intensive process. It requires not only mechanical redesign but also the reconfiguration of cooling systems, changes to vehicle control software, updates to supplier contracts, recertification by regulatory bodies, and repeated testing for durability and performance. Industries that rely on these materials
should not be providing billions of dollars in corporate welfare to large, profitable corporations like Intel without getting anything in return. So Bernie Sanders is saying, thanks for taking my idea, Donald Trump.
Well, Katie, you know, here's really the question. We can see what Trump is doing. And if you take, for example, tariffs and, you know, these investments in these companies, which, by the way, I set up an economic development operation in Ohio when I became governor. And I told him at the time, we are not going to invest in private companies. We are not going to do it. We'll help companies to come to Ohio, but we're not going to take a stake in them, because anytime you do, it doesn't turn out well at all. And you can just think, even when we made a loan, I think it was under Clinton, to Solyndra, and ended up being a disaster. But there's a number of things that Trump is doing, and I am not convinced, and in fact, I'm not convinced, I don't believe that whoever comes after Trump will adopt these policies, because we're not talking about right wing and, you know, left wing and all that. We're going to talk about conservatives. Conservatives have a sense that government as a last resort, not as a first resort. It's in our nature. I mean, I didn't grow up as a Republican. I grew up as a blue-collar kid and using common sense. But I never thought that it made sense to impose government in all these things, that government should be the last resort and sometimes necessary, including in areas of social services. I think, Katie, it is not in the nature of conservatives to want to continue these policies. I think we're seeing this at this point in time, but I think over time the Republican Party will reclaim its general philosophy, and I don't think this is what the future is going to portend for Republicans or for the country, for that matter.
What evidence do you have to support that belief, Governor?
I think, Katie, it's the nature of who you are. It's the nature of being a conservative, as opposed to being the nature of what it is to be a liberal. And, you know, you hear a lot of Republicans complaining about what they see happening, but they don't say much. But you move on from Trump, who's a, you know, obviously an incredibly powerful figure that dominates the Republican Party. But this is our second nature is to.
This isn't just a component swap. It's a foundational shift in the vehicle's drivetrain. Automakers can't just wake up one day and decide to shift to induction motors across the board. So while the industry may be pursuing these alternatives as part of its long-term diversification strategy, they do not offer a short-term solution to the supply chain and pricing risk posed by tariffs. This brings us to the critical strategy that many manufacturers, and, arguably, the government must embrace: a hybrid approach that combines continued, stable imports with the development of domestic manufacturing and recycling capabilities. In the short term, maintaining the uninterrupted flow of critical components through carefully managed trade channels is essential. Temporary exemptions, flexible import quotas, and country-specific agreements allow companies like Tesla, GM, and Ford to keep their production lines running while working toward local solutions. In parallel, several facilities in the United States are beginning to move toward processing rare earth materials and producing automotive-grade magnets. Early targets suggest an initial capacity of a few thousand tons annually, a strong step forward, but still a fraction of the total demand across all industries that rely on these materials. Recycling adds another dimension to the solution. As EVs, wind turbines, and industrial equipment reach end of life, collecting and reprocessing rare earth materials from used components can reduce raw material dependency. However, recycling is a long-term strategy that requires building an entirely new industry, one that includes traceability systems, logistics networks, quality assurance mechanisms, and environmental standards. In the near future, recycled magnets will most likely be used in service parts and repairs rather than new vehicle production. But in the long run, this buffer helps stabilize the entire market by adding another source of material supply, one that is less affected by geopolitics and global trade routes. So, what happens if this hybrid approach isn't implemented effectively? Quite simply, the market reacts negatively. Consumers experience delivery delays, reduced model availability, and higher prices. Campaigns are rescheduled, and trust begins to erode. Used car prices rise as demand for new vehicles outpaces supply. And most importantly, public confidence in the stability of the EV transition begins to waver. This is why automakers must not only solve the supply chain issue, but also communicate clearly with the public. When customers don't understand the reason behind pricing changes or delivery delays, they assume the worst. Transparency about part availability, production timelines, and pricing strategies can help reduce the perception of risk and keep consumer sentiment positive. As we look toward the medium term, the strategic goal becomes clear: expand U.S. capacity while continuing external flow management. This means building new facilities, training a skilled workforce, maintaining high-quality standards, and introducing supportive policies that make domestic manufacturing viable. It also means continuing to engage in bilateral trade agreements and region-specific contracts that secure part availability during the transition period. Tariffs, in this context, should not be seen as blunt instruments, but as adjustable levers tied to industrial progress milestones. If domestic production capacity hits a target by a certain date, tariffs may adjust accordingly. This approach maintains bargaining power on the global stage without disrupting domestic industries or punishing consumers. Meanwhile, another layer of complexity is emerging. Permanent magnets are not used solely in automotive applications. They are also critical in renewable energy infrastructure, especially wind turbines, in military and aerospace equipment, industrial automation, and even in medical devices like MRI machines. As all these sectors compete for the same limited pool of raw materials, prioritization becomes a new challenge. Who gets the magnets first? Defense projects? Energy producers? Car manufacturers? The answer, again, lies not in choosing winners and losers, but in increasing total capacity and creating sector-specific policies that protect critical supply chains without harming others. This includes predictable public procurement schedules, flexible manufacturing licenses, and coordinated recycling initiatives that avoid market panic. Finally, let's zoom out and consider the long-term outlook. The most sustainable strategy for the U.S. EV industry and the economy at large is to build a supply ecosystem that is resilient, diversified, and scalable. That means continued investment in domestic production, partnerships with trusted foreign suppliers, and a strong focus on circular economy models like recycling and material recovery. From an engineering standpoint, we'll also see greater diversification in